I want you to picture this. I really want you to imagine this.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, so it is the late 16th century in the Caribbean. You are standing in a remote colonial outpost on the southwestern coast of Puerto Rico.
Right down in the most exposed part of the island.
Exactly. And the tropical heat is, it's absolutely oppressive. It's sticking your clothes to your skin. The ocean stretching out in front of you is endless. And it is teeming with enemy corsairs who are just looking for a Spanish target.
It's a total pressure cooker.
It really is. And survival in this brutal, isolated environment, it did not mean following the rules sent over on a ship from a king sitting in some palace in Europe.
No, absolutely not.
Survival meant breaking absolutely every rule in the book. So today our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this fascinating, honestly almost unbelievable historical double life.
It really sounds like fiction when you first read it.
It does. We are going to explore how the very lawmakers appointed to protect the Spanish crown's interests on this frontier, how they actually became the masterminds of a massive underground smuggling empire.
Yeah, and the historical landscape we're stepping into here is incredibly murky, but we aren't just speculating about these shadow economies.
Right, we have the receipts.
We do. This entire deep dive is built on a stack of incredible primary documents and really meticulous historical analyses. We are going to be diving deep into centuries-old records from the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, Spain.
Which historians usually just call the AGI.
Exactly, the AGI. These are the actual physical, handwritten administrative records of the Spanish Empire. And on top of that, we're leaning heavily on the phenomenal work of prominent historians like Arturo Morales Carrion, Salvador Brau, and Estela Cifra de Lubril.
Absolute legends in this field.
They really are. These are the scholars who basically spent their lives in the archives, just dusting off the parchment, reading between the lines of these super dry bureaucratic reports, and, decoding what turned out to be a massive systemic secret that defined an entire era.
And the ultimate irony of this whole story, the thing that just completely hooks you when you look at these sources, is that the cleverest outlaw in this whole Caribbean saga wasn't, some swashbuckling pirate hiding in a secret cove with a cutlass.
No, not at all.
The mastermind was the town's top attorney. The man writing the local laws was the one breaking them with just breathtaking efficiency.
Yeah, the architecture of that double life is just staggering. But to understand how a town's chief legal defender morphs into its chief smuggler, we really have to first understand the environment that forced that transformation.
Because he didn't just wake up one day and decide to become a pirate king.
Exactly. We have to look at the...
Right, because if you were listening to this and wondering, why on earth didn't the Spanish crown just send the military to arrest everyone? You really have to realize that geography basically dictated your loyalty back then.
Oh, geography was everything.
So let's unpack the reality of that geography.
Yeah.
What did Puerto Rico actually look like in the late 1500s from, I guess, an administrative and physical standpoint?
Well, on paper, in the royal courts of Madrid, the Spanish crown ruled the entire island of Puerto Rico. But the physical reality of that rule was hyper-concentrated in one place.
Just one city.
Just San Juan, up on the northern coast. San Juan was the fortress. That is where the military garrison was stationed, where the royal treasury collected taxes, and where the governor actually sat.
But our story isn't in San Juan.
No. Hundreds of miles away, on the southwestern coast, you had the town of San Germán.
And hundreds of miles in the 16th century, across an island divided by a massive, really dense central mountain range, the Cordillera Central, and just impenetrable tropical forests. You couldn't just hop on a paved highway.
No, it wasn't a day trip.
A journey from San Germán to San Juan over land was treacherous, slow, and sometimes it was literally deadly. They might as well have been on the dark side of the moon.
The isolation was profound. San Germán was effectively an island on an island, and because they were on that exposed southwestern coast, they were routinely besieged by enemy corsairs.
Just sitting ducks, basically.
Basically, yeah. We are talking about heavily armed French, English, and Dutch ships that just continuously patrolled those waters. But worse than the constant threat of enemy attacks, the people of San Germán were almost entirely forsaken by their own government.
Which is the crazy part.
They were completely abandoned by the Spanish royal supply ships.
I am always struggling with the logistics of this mercantilist system. Because Spain claimed all this territory, so surely they had a vested interest in keeping their colonists, alive.
You would think so. But the Spanish mercantilist system was incredibly rigid. The law required that all trade go through official channels, on official Spanish fleets, and everything had to be heavily taxed by the crown.
Right, the monopolies.
Exactly. You could only buy Spanish goods, and you could only sell to Spanish merchants. But those official fleets rarely bothered to sail all the way around the island to the dangerous, exposed waters of San Germán just to drop off a few supplies.
It just wasn't worth the risk or the money.
Right, it wasn't economically viable for these massive galleons.
Let me make sure I am grasping the reality of this. You have an entire town completely cut off from the capital by mountains, trying to survive in a hostile, pirate-infested environment.
Yeah, that's the setup.
And the motherland is essentially saying, we might send a boat in a few years. Don't trade with anyone else in the meantime, even if they have the food and tools you literally need to survive.
That is exactly it. The royal decree was essentially
Starve?
but do it legally. And human beings, when pushed to the brink, they tend to prefer survival over bureaucratic compliance.
Yeah.
So the local geography provided a solution to the problem that the Crown created. The southwestern coast of Puerto Rico features these incredibly deep, secluded waters, specifically the bays of Boquerón and Guanajibo.
And deep waters, meaning they could accommodate the massive drafts of ocean-going vessels, right? Like big galleons.
Exactly. And secluded meaning you could tuck a massive ship in there and it wouldn't be seen from the open ocean.
Like a natural hiding spot.
Perfect natural harbors. The mangrove forests and the coastal curve offered complete visual cover. And these bays became the epicenter for what became known as the economy of contraband, or in the terminology of the colonial era, rescate.
I love the etymology of that word, rescate. It literally translates to rescue or ransom in Spanish.
Yes, exactly.
But in this context, it meant illegal trade. They didn't call it smuggling. They called it a rescue.
It is a really profound linguistic twist. They called it a rescue because from the perspective of the locals in San Germán, this illegal trade was literally rescuing them from economic starvation and physical ruin.
Because nobody else was coming to save them.
Right. And the mechanics of the rescate were highly organized. It was deeply rooted in the physical commodities of the era. The locals in San Germán had vast resources that the passing foreign ships desperately wanted, specifically cattle hides and sugar.
Because leather in the 16th century was, it was the equivalent of plastic or steel today. You needed cattle hides for absolutely everything in Europe.
Oh, totally. Think about the European armies of the time. They needed leather for boots, for saddles, for belts, for the straps on their armor, for bookbinding, for machinery. The demand for Caribbean cattle hides was just insatiable.
So they had a massive cash cow. Literally.
Literally. So the locals would slaughter the wild and ranched cattle, cure these massive hides, and trade them, along with barrels of local sugar, directly with the French, English, and Dutch ships that would quietly slip into the bays of Boquerón or Guanajibo under the cover of darkness.
And what are the locals getting in return for all this?
Well, in return for the hides and sugar, the people of San Germán received the manufactured goods they desperately needed to survive and build their society.
Like what kind of goods?
They received textiles and fine cloths for clothing, heavy iron tools for farming and construction, and, crucially, wine.
The fact that wine is consistently listed in these historical records as a survival necessity, right alongside iron farming tools, is just incredible to me.
It sounds funny today, but in a tropical world where the fresh water sources could easily carry deadly parasites or bacteria, fermented beverages like wine were incredibly important.
Oh, for sanitation.
Yeah, daily hydration and sanitation, not to mention religious ceremonies and, honestly, basic psychological comfort on a brutal frontier.
Right, taking the edge off of living in a pirate-infested swamp.
Exactly. Now, to give this shadow economy the proper historical weight, we really have to explicitly bring in the work of the great historian Arturo Morales Carrion here.
Yes, his work is foundational for this.
It is. He wrote a definitive, groundbreaking study on the decline of Spanish exclusivism in the Caribbean. Morales Carrion's work proves that the rescate was not just some petty, disorganized crime committed by a few desperate peasants trading on a beach at midnight.
It wasn't just, a couple of guys in a rowboat tossing a barrel of sugar to a passing Dutch pirate.
Far from it. Morales Carrion's analysis of the historical data shows that rescate was a systemic, foundational lifeline for 16th and 17th century San Germán.
It was the economy.
It was the entire economy. And the kicker here is the level of civic organization. This illegal economy was actively and systematically organized by the municipal leaders themselves.
Wow.
Yeah, the ruling elite of the town, the very people appointed by the crown to govern, were the ones operating the black market.
See, I have to put myself in the shoes of the colonial administrators for a second. It is hard to wrap my head around this scale of subversion. How could an entire town, led by its own government, run a massive black market without the royal treasury in San Juan? Eventually finding out, sending the military over those mountains, and just crushing them for treason.
It's a great question.
The best analogy I can think of listening to this is a corporate branch office located in the middle of nowhere. And this branch office is completely ignoring headquarters. They are cooking the books, and they are basically selling the company's inventory out the back door to a rival company.
That's a great way to picture it.
And they do it brazenly because they know the corporate auditors from headquarters face a 3-month boat ride just to check on them.
That corporate branch analogy captures the dynamic perfectly, but we can take the mechanics of it a step further. Headquarters in San Juan absolutely knew, to some extent, that the books were being cooked.
They weren't totally blind.
No, rumors of the wealth in San Germán circulated. But knowing a crime is happening and legally proving it while managing a massive logistical nightmare, those are two very different things.
Right. What are you going to do about it?
Exactly. San Juan didn't have the manpower to permanently station a garrison in San Germán. They didn't have the roads to march an army there quickly.
So the physical separation creates this massive enforcement vacuum.
Yes, but an enforcement vacuum isn't quite enough to protect you from the eventual audit. The branch office still had to survive the intermittent visits from royal inspectors.
Right, because eventually someone is going to show up with a clipboard.
Precisely. And to survive that, the town needed a genius accountant, so to speak. Someone who knew exactly how to file the paperwork, how to draft the official reports, to make everything look just legal enough, just pathetic enough to prevent headquarters from launching a full-scale military crackdown.
And knowing that this entire town is literally surviving on an underground smuggling economy and knowing they need a legal shield to protect it, we really have to look at the architect of this incredible double life.
Yes, the man who provided that legal shield was Juan Rodríguez de Olivencia.
And what immediately stands out to me in the source material about Juan is that he wasn't a local. He wasn't born into this Caribbean corsair trading culture.
No, he was a complete outsider. He arrived from the absolute heart of Old Castile. The archival records place his birth around 1527 in a town called Fuenteveros, which is located in the province of Avila, Spain.
Okay, so deeply Spanish.
Very. He was the son of Anton Rodriguez and Catalina Rodriguez Diaz.
Consider the physical and cultural contrast of Fuenteveros for a moment. Because Avila is deeply inland Spain. It is a high-altitude plateau.
Right. Very different climate.
It is cold, it is dry, it is mountainous, and it is defined by ancient stone walls and really rigid Catholic orthodoxy. Culturally and geographically, I mean, it is about as far from the humid, tropical, fluid, corsair-infested mangrove swamps of the Caribbean as a human being could possibly get.
The contrast is stark, and it is actually the key to his success. When Juan crossed the Atlantic, he didn't bring agricultural skills or, military prowess.
He wasn't a farmer or a soldier.
Right. He brought something much more dangerous and specific: formal Castilian legal training.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he understood the intricate, bureaucratic, hyperformal, and heavily codified language of Spanish imperial law. And when this trained Castilian lawyer arrived in the volatile, lawless southwest of Puerto Rico, he recognized an incredible structural opportunity.
I'm just fascinated by the mechanics of this. What does a formally trained lawyer from the dry plains of central Spain actually do in a tropical frontier town that eats, sleeps, and breathes smuggling?
It seems like a mismatch.
Right. How does he make himself useful to these hardened locals?
He makes himself indispensable by becoming the interface between their illegal reality and the crown's legal demands. He becomes the town's procurador general.
Which was a major role, right?
It was a vital municipal role. By day, he was the official legal voice of San Germán. He was the man responsible for drafting probanzas.
Let's break down the probanza, actually.
Yeah.
What did one of these documents actually look and sound like?
A probanza, specifically a probanza de méritos y servicios, was essentially a highly formal, written legal argument and testimony of merit. It was basically a PR campaign directed at the crown.
So?
Juan would draft these elaborate, flowery documents on parchment using the absolute most obsequious Castilian legal phrasing. He would voice these petitions to the Royal Audiencia of Santo Domingo, which served as the high appellate court and administrative center for the whole region.
So he is sitting at a wooden desk in the sweltering heat, dipping a quill in ink, and writing to the high court saying something like, "Oh, most illustrious and Catholic Audiencia, we, your most humble and loyal subjects in San Germán, are suffering terribly.
Yes. Exactly that tone.
Our crops have failed. Our land rights are being threatened by wild beasts. The corsairs have impoverished us. Please send tax relief and have mercy on your obedient servants.
You captured the tone perfectly. It was a complete performance of utter compliance and desperate poverty. He is defending their municipal land rights, he is begging for financial relief, and he is playing the role of the beleaguered, loyal Spanish colonial official to absolute perfection.
Just putting on a masterclass in bureaucratic whining.
Exactly. And the audiencia reads these meticulously formatted documents, written by a fellow Castilian who knows exactly how to structure a legal argument, and they see a town barely hanging on.
That is the day job.
That is the day job. By night, the reality was entirely inverted. Juan used his intimate knowledge of the coastal geography, his growing connections with the local elites, and his abject mastery of the legal blind spots to facilitate the massive rescate operations.
The structural brilliance of this is mind-boggling, because by holding both the pen and the ports, he completely controlled the frontier's narrative.
He controlled what headquarters saw.
Right. Let's think about the logistics of cooking those 16th century ledgers. If a royal inspector asks why there are no cattle hides to be taxed this year, Juan is the guy who writes the official report stating that a terrible hurricane wiped out the herds.
Yep.
Meanwhile, those very hides are already halfway to Amsterdam on a Dutch galleon. And if the crown ever got suspicious about the rampant smuggling, Juan, as the procurador general, was the very guy appointed to write the official investigation into the smuggling.
It is the ultimate conflict of interest, engineered for maximum profit. And historians know this duality existed because the evidence, both the legal cover and the illegal reality, is preserved in the Archivo General de Indias.
The AGI again.
Specifically, historians point to the Audiencia de Santo Domingo, Legajo 168.
And legajo being the archival term for, like, a bundle or file of historical documents, right?
Yeah, it's basically a massive bundle of colonial paperwork bound with string, just sitting on a shelf in Seville for centuries. In Legajo 168 of the AGI, you can read Juan's official petitions. You can literally see his elegant handwriting, his airtight legal arguments begging the crown for help, and the documents confirming his appointment as Procurator General.
So his cover story is fully documented.
Perfectly documented. But then historians cross-reference that with other royal treasury reports preserved in the AGI, the internal memos dealing with visits from actual crown inspectors, and panic reports of contraband from neighboring jurisdictions.
And what do those say?
Those separate reports detail the massive, systematic coastal rescate happening right under Juan's nose, an operation he was actively organizing and shielding.
So the documentation actually shows the shadow economy operating right behind the legal facade. But consider the logistics of that for a second. Because a lawyer, no matter how brilliant, cannot move thousands of pounds of sugar and leather onto a Dutch ship all by himself.
Right, he's just one guy with a pen.
He needs muscle. He needs political backing. How did he collude with the rest of the local elite to actually physically pull this off?
Well, he formed incredibly tight, synergistic alliances with the civic and military leaders of the town. The most prominent example is his collusion with the local alcalde, or mayor, a man named Rodrigo Ortiz Velez.
And the alcalde is the one who theoretically commands the local militia, right? The law enforcement.
Exactly.
So if the mayor and the town attorney are both shaking hands in the dark with the Dutch merchants, who is left to arrest anyone?
No one is left. The system is completely captured. The military commander, the alcalde, ensures that the coastal patrols are conveniently diverted inland on the specific nights the Dutch ships arrive in Boquerón.
Oh no, we were patrolling the mountains tonight.
Oops, we missed them. And then the attorney, Juan, ensures the daily logs and the official paperwork show a perfectly quiet, uneventful week with no foreign sightings. It was administrative and military collusion on a grand scale, a completely unified local front against the distant crown.
So Juan has built this incredible, highly lucrative system. He has the impenetrable Castilian legal cover. He has the physical enforcement provided by political alliances with the mayor. And he is making a fortune trading cattle hides for wine and iron in the dead of night.
He's living the dream, really.
But, you know, a clever man can only run a scheme like this for a single lifetime. If you want to run a shadow empire for centuries, if you want to create an institution of contraband, a handshake with the mayor just isn't enough. You need to build your empire on bloodlines.
And that transition from a single generation's lucrative scheme to a multi-generational power structure brings us to the most strategic move Juan Rodríguez de Olivencia ever made.
The marriage.
Yes. He realized that as an outsider, his legal jargon only got him so far. To cement his legacy, he needed to embed himself into the very DNA of the Caribbean frontier. We really have to examine his marriage.
Enter Mariana.
Yes. Juan married a woman named Doña Maria de Gracia de Matos y Milan.
Quite the name.
It is. If you dig into the parish lines and genealogical records, you will also see her recorded as Mariana González de Matos. For our purposes, we'll just refer to her as Mariana.
And to be clear, this wasn't just, a casual romance that happened to blossom in the tropics. This was a calculated high-stakes merger.
Oh, absolutely. It was the ultimate fusion of colonial power dynamics. Juan brought the Castilian legal authority and the municipal titles. Mariana brought the deep, established local networks, because Mariana's father was a man named Capitan Francisco González de Matos.
And Capitan Francisco was not your average Spanish colonist trying to scratch out a living in the dirt.
No, he was a highly influential figure, and understanding his background is absolutely crucial to understanding the culture the Matos family created. I want to explicitly cite the work of the renowned historian Salvador Brau here.
Another giant in the field.
Yes. Brau went deep into the historical documentation of Puerto Rico, really poring over the earliest demographic records. And Brau confirms a very specific recurring status marker for Capitan Francisco. The colonial records explicitly identify Capitan Francisco as being of Portuguese origin.
Okay, Portuguese.
The phrase repeatedly used in the primary documents is natural del Reino de Portugal.
Native of the Kingdom of Portugal, which, if you were listening to this today, you might think, okay, Spain, Portugal, they share the Iberian Peninsula, they are neighbors, what's the big deal?
Right, it doesn't sound scandalous to us.
Why was being identified as Portuguese such a massive status marker in early southwestern Puerto Rico?
Well, in the context of the 16th and 17th century Spanish Empire, the term Portuguese carried a tremendous amount of economic weight and, crucially, a lot of hidden subtext.
Let's start with the economic weight.
On the overt economic level, it represented a connection to a powerful global merchant and military network. The Portuguese were the master navigators of the era, the premier global merchants. If you were tied into a Portuguese trading family, you had immediate access to capital, to ships, and to Atlantic trade routes that completely bypassed the rigid, slow Spanish monopolies.
We can think of it in terms of logistics. For a guy like Juan, who was running an illicit export business, marrying into a Portuguese merchant family is like a local manufacturer merging with an international shipping syndicate.
It's the perfect vertical integration.
Right. It gives him the physical infrastructure to move his goods on a massive scale.
It absolutely supercharged the physical operation of the Rescate. But the economic advantage is really only the surface level. There is a second layer to the Portuguese identity in this era that we absolutely have to discuss because it fundamentally shaped the psychology and a culture of secrecy that defined the Matos family and, honestly, San Germán itself.
The subtext of being Portuguese in the Spanish colonies. We were talking about the shadow of the Inquisition.
We are. In the Spanish colonies, identifying someone in the records as natural to Portugal was frequently a coded term.
Coded for what?
It was used by the authorities and quietly acknowledged by the people themselves to denote families of Sephardic Jewish descent, specifically conversos or crypto-Jews.
To provide some context for this, because it's so important, we're talking about people who had been forced by the state to convert to Catholicism, but were secretly maintaining their Jewish faith, rituals, and identity entirely underground.
Yes. When the Spanish monarchy expelled its Jewish population in 1492, massive numbers fled across the border into Portugal. But a few years later, Portugal also instituted forced conversions.
So they couldn't escape it.
No. Many of these families, facing just horrific persecution, became nominal Catholics. They attended Mass, they baptized their children, but they maintained their ancient traditions in absolute terrifying secrecy behind closed doors. Over the next century, seeking to escape the burning gaze of the Iberian Inquisition, many of these Portuguese New Christians migrated to the furthest fringes of the Spanish colonies in the Americas.
And you can't get much further on the fringe than San Germán.
Exactly. They looked for the absolute frontiers, isolated places exactly like San Germán, where the Inquisition's bureaucracy couldn't easily reach them.
That reframes everything about this story for me, because you have a community that, for generations, is already biologically, culturally, and psychologically adapted to living a high-stakes double life.
The historical context is vital here. We cannot say with absolute DNA-level certainty that Capitan Francisco González de Matos was practicing crypto-Judaism in his basement.
Right, because the whole point was to not leave a paper trail.
Exactly. The paper trail for secret religions is, by definition, intentionally erased. But the
Hmm.
historical context of his Portuguese origin makes it a very strong probability, and it heavily informs the culture of the entire Matos network. These were families who had literally learned how to perform outward compliance to a hostile state while preserving their true identity in the shadows.
It makes me think of those incredible, almost haunting Sephardic customs that survived for centuries in the Americas. Things people did as family traditions without even knowing the religious origins.
Oh, there's so many fascinating examples of that.
Picture this. Families out in the rural Caribbean hills, where the women would insist on meticulously sweeping the dirt from the edges of the room toward the center of the floor, rather than sweeping it out the front door.
Yes, the sweeping custom is a perfect example of this hidden history. In the old days in Spain, sweeping out the door on a Friday afternoon could signal to your neighbors, and by extension, the Inquisition's spies, that you were cleaning and preparing your home for the Jewish Sabbath.
Because you couldn't be caught preparing for Shabbat.
Right. So sweeping to the center was a physical survival mechanism to hide that preparation, and over generations, it just became a deeply ingrained family tradition in the Caribbean long after the original meaning was lost.
Or the tradition of lighting candles on Friday night, but doing it in a hidden closet. Or placing the lit candles inside a hollowed-out gourd so the flickering light wouldn't be seen from the street by a passing official.
These tactile, everyday customs, the hidden candles in the gourd, the sweeping to the center, they are the physical manifestations of a profound psychology of secrecy. Now, take a step back and connect that multi-generational psychology to the illegal economy of San Germán.
The overlap is just chillingly perfect. If your family has spent 100 years learning how to hide your religion from the king's inquisitors under threat of being burned at the stake, hiding your cattle hides and your sugar from the king's tax collectors must feel like, well, child's play.
It utilizes the exact same survival skill set, the intense compartmentalization, the absolute unbreakable trust required within the family unit, the flawless outward performance of loyalty to the crown, combined with a hidden, contradictory internal reality.
They were bred for this environment.
They really were. When Juan Rodríguez de Olivencia married Mariana, he didn't just get access to Portuguese merchant ships. He married into a culture that had spent a century perfecting the art of the underground.
The synthesis is
Right.
incredible. You take Castilian legal cover, you fuse it with Portuguese underground networks and the psychology of the conversos, and you get an absolutely unstoppable colonial force.
Unstoppable.
So Juan and Mariana get married, they merge these empires. Let's look at the actual mechanics of how they expanded. Who were the children in this first generation of the dynasty, and how do they divide up the labor of running this region?
Well, Juan and Mariana had several children who essentially took their parents' blueprint and expanded it across the entire southwestern geography of the island.
Like a franchise.
A bit like that, yeah. First, you have Juan Lorenzo, or simply Lorenzo de Matos in some records. He was the vanguard. He was instrumental in physically expanding the family's influence along the western frontier of the island, pushing their control into new territories.
So he's securing the physical space, the frontier expansion.
Yes. Then you have Antonio Rodriguez Borrero, sometimes spelled in the archives as Borrero. His descendants are fascinating because they focused on the raw economics. They are the ones who secured massive, sprawling rural landholdings, which were called hatos.
And in Hato being a massive cattle ranch, which, if we think about the logistics of the Rescate, feeds directly back into the smuggling economy.
Everything feeds back into the Rescate.
Because more land means more cattle means more hides, and more hides means more leverage to trade with the Dutch for iron and wine. Antonio's branch is basically securing the manufacturing base of the entire supply chain.
Antonio ensured they owned the product from birth to export. It's brilliant. And finally, you have Diego Martinez de Matos. Diego took a slightly different path. He became a cavalry officer and a municipal councilman, a regidor.
Keeping a foot in politics.
Exactly. He married a prominent woman named Doña de Espinosa. Diego's role was to maintain the family's civic and military prominence. He kept the family firmly seated at the table of local government in San Germán, ensuring they always had a hand on the levers of official power.
It is a brilliantly coordinated three-pronged attack by a single generation. You have one son expanding the geographic frontier, one son securing the agricultural wealth and the supply chain, and one son holding down the political fort in town.
The synergy worked beautifully. By the time this first generation of children came into their own and took the reins, the Matos Olivencia dynasty completely controlled the land, the law, and the illicit trade routes of the Southwest.
The scale of what they built is impressive. but my mind goes to the vulnerability of an empire like this.
There are always vulnerabilities.
Right. Building a vast network of massive ranches across Sabana Grande and Yauco, securing political offices, and running a highly illegal, lucrative smuggling operation is one thing. But the hardest part of any dynasty isn't necessarily building it. The hardest part is keeping it from fracturing.
Oh, keeping the wealth together is the ultimate challenge.
Because families fight. Wealth creates jealousy. Children marry outsiders who might not understand the rules, who might not be trustworthy. How do you prevent a multi-generational criminal enterprise disguised as a colonial aristocracy from just falling apart?
Well, you build a fortress out of your own family tree, you lock the gates. Once the vast wealth and the complex networks were established, the family employed a strategy of extreme, iron-fisted endogamy.
And endogamy meaning the practice of marrying exclusively within your own local group, or in this case, directly within your own family.
Yes. The scale of this practice is hard to overstate, and to understand it, we need to bring in the demographic research of historian Estela Cifra de Lubriel.
Her work on this is fascinating.
It is. She conducted a massive, meticulous evaluation of the hateros, the landowning elite of early Puerto Rico. Cifra de Lubriel tracked the parish registries and marriage documents to see how these specific families utilized consanguinity, which occurs in marriage, to consolidate and furiously protect their power.
So the data shows they weren't marrying the children of other prominent families on the north side of the island to build diplomatic bridges.
No.
They were marrying their own cousins to keep the land, and more importantly, the secrets, trapped inside the bloodline.
Cifra de Lubriel's work demonstrates that this consanguinity wasn't accidental, and it wasn't just a lack of options on a remote frontier. It was a highly deliberate strategic choice by the ruling class in San Germán.
Let's look at the mechanics of this through a very specific case study within the family, like Gregorio Martinez de Matos.
That's a perfect example.
Walk us through the branches of Gregorio's family tree. How tight was this knot?
Okay, so Gregorio Martinez de Matos y Espinosa was the son of Diego, the cavalry officer and councilman we just discussed. Gregorio married a woman named Doña Juana Vélez Barrero.
Okay, keeping in the established circles.
Right. And together, through their union, they amassed even more royal land grants across the region. But when it came time for their own children and grandchildren to marry, they did not look outside the walls of the family compound.
Who were they marrying?
They looked directly back to the lines of Gregorio's brothers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The documentation shows that the children of Gregorio and Juana married the children of Gaspar Martinez de Matos and his wife Juana Josefa Ramos Colon. And they also married directly back into the line of Diego Martinez de Matos II.
That is, the best analogy I can think of to visualize this isn't a family tree, which branches outward. It's more like a modern submarine where the ship is divided into watertight compartments.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to picture it.
Because if you let an outsider in and they breach the hull, the whole submarine floods and sinks. But by sealing the compartments, by making sure every new family unit is already part of the existing structure, you prevent any outside pressure from destroying the ship. You separate the strands of the family for one generation, and then you weave them tightly back together in the next, closing the loop.
The closed-loop analogy is highly accurate. The sprawling branches of Lorenzo, Gregorio, Gaspar, and Antonio didn't diffuse into the wider colonial population. They all merged aggressively back into a single, tightly knit, impenetrable oligarchy.
I have to pause on this because to a modern listener, the idea of consistently and strategically marrying your first and second cousins sounds deeply uncomfortable and, frankly, extreme.
It does sound jarring to us today.
Was this purely an economic calculation? Was it just a math equation to keep the massive cattle ranches from being divided up as dowries among outsiders? Or was there an element of pure paranoid secrecy required here?
You really cannot separate the economics from the paranoia. They are two sides of the exact same coin.
So it was both.
Yes. Mathematically, if you have massive land holdings, the moment a daughter marries a man from an outside family, a significant chunk of that land, and the wealth it generates, leaves your family's control. Endogamy preserves the physical acreage. But the psychological and operational security is arguably even more important when your entire economy is based on treason against the crown.
Because an outsider brings outside loyalties, outside gossip, and massive outside risk.
Consider the stakes. If you marry an outsider who turns out to be fiercely loyal to the king, or who holds a grudge against a family member, or who simply talks too much after a few glasses of that smuggled Dutch wine.
Your entire network is exposed.
Exactly. If the governor in San Juan gets actionable proof of the risk gate, he wouldn't just fine you. The penalty for this level of subversion was confiscation of all wealth, imprisonment, or hanging.
And if we tie this back to the potential Portuguese and crypto-Jewish roots of the Matos family, endogamy was also the primary historical mechanism those communities used to survive the Inquisition in Europe.
It was the only way to survive.
You only married someone you knew with absolute multi-generational certainty, shared your hidden identity, and understood the horrific consequences of exposure.
A closed oligarchy functions as a shield. It naturally protects physical wealth, and it aggressively protects dangerous secrets. It creates a completely unified front against the outside world.
Everyone is in on it.
Everyone in the family is complicit in the smuggling, everyone is benefiting financially, and therefore, everyone has a massive vested interest in keeping their mouths shut. If one person falls to the royal auditors, the whole family structure collapses. It creates a terrifying, inescapable, but highly effective form of loyalty.
Structurally speaking, they built a colonial mafia. It was a family syndicate that operated as a shadow government in the Caribbean.
The operational parallels to a modern syndicate are very strong. They controlled the territory, they controlled the judges, they controlled the supply chain, and they kept the profits entirely within the family.
So we've talked extensively about these alliances in theory. We've mapped out the marriage strategies, the legal loopholes, and the smuggling routes. But I want to get down to the brass tacks of how historians actually uncover a ghost.
The paper trail.
Yeah, because if the entire point of this family's existence was absolute secrecy, if their survival depended on cooking the books and leaving no paper trail of the race gate, how do we know the messy realities of their economic lives? How do you trace a shadow through a 400-year-old archive?
You trace the shadow by waiting for the family to make a mistake. Or, well, more accurately, historians look for the specific moments where the family's internal hidden business dealings accidentally intersect with official, rigid crown bureaucracy in a way they cannot entirely control.
Like a glitch in the matrix.
Exactly. And we have a spectacular, highly documented example of this happening. We are going to transition to a specific, dramatic primary document that just blew this wide open.
I absolutely love primary documents. It's the historical equivalent of finding the smoking gun. Set the physical scene for this document for us. Where and when are we?
The year is 1652. We are in the municipality of San Germán.
Okay, mid-17th century.
Right. And the political temperature is incredibly high because a formal, comprehensive audit has been ordered by the governor of Puerto Rico, Don Diego de Aguilera y Gamboa.
Oh, an audit.
The governor suspects financial irregularities, and he has sent a military lieutenant, Teniente Aguirre Don Fabian Gonzalez, all the way across the mountains to conduct this audit.
This changes the dynamic completely. This isn't just, a friendly administrative check-in by a local clerk. The governor has deployed a military lieutenant to physically audit the town's debts, land holdings, and finances. The crown is actively sniffing around the fortress.
The tension would have been palpable. The proceedings of this specific audit were meticulously recorded, and those literal pages are preserved today in the AGPR, the Archivo General de Puerto Rico.
Incredible that they survived.
It provides an incredible, unvarnished window into how the family operated under intense pressure.
Imagine the scene. You've got this tense courtroom setting in this sweltering tropical outpost. The military lieutenant, Don Fabian Gonzalez, is sitting at a table with his quill, his parchment, and his armed guards, just demanding answers about missing money and unpaid debts. Who gets called to the stand to answer for the family?
Diego Martinez de Matos appears before the commission.
Okay.
He is there because he has a very specific, undeniable problem. He needs to acknowledge and legally settle a significant debt on the official record.
And being forced to admit a massive debt when the royal auditor with the power to confiscate your land is sitting right in front of you is, well, it's a nightmare scenario for a smuggler.
It forces exposure. Diego owes this substantial debt to a man named Capitan Don Francisco Rodríguez de la Fuente. But the document gets fascinating because of how Diego chooses to settle it.
What does he do?
Diego isn't just handing over a bag of coins to pay his own debt. The court register explicitly records that Diego presents a sworn written testimony to the military commission. In this testimony, Diego legally pledges his upcoming agricultural harvests to settle the debt. Specifically, he pledges massive shipments of cacao.
Cacao, the raw ingredient for chocolate. Another highly valuable, easily transportable commodity, perfect for export.
An incredibly lucrative cash crop. But here is the massive twist in the testimony.
Okay, Marty.
Diego pledges his cacao to settle the debt on behalf of another man, a man named Don Antonio Antunes.
The plot thickens. Who is Don Antonio Antunes, and why on earth is Diego paying his massive debts with cacao?
Well, in the sworn legal declaration presented to the auditor, Diego states that Don Antonio Antunes is his father, or possibly his stepfather. You know, the colonial terminology for blended families can sometimes be fluid.
Right.
But he legally claims him as his patriarchal figure who is unable to attend the intense audit proceedings due to failing health.
Let me make sure I'm following the legal maneuver here. A son is paying his sick father's debt with a massive future shipment of cacao just to get the military auditor off their backs.
That's how it reads.
On the surface, if I'm just reading the court transcript, that sounds like a fairly standard, if slightly dramatic, colonial small claims court case.
Yeah.
You know, family taking care of its own. Why do historians view this specific document from 1652 as a gold mine? What is the loophole being exploited here?
To understand the loophole, you have to look at who Don Antonio Antunes actually was in the broader Caribbean landscape. Antunes was another highly prominent, wealthy fish of Portuguese background, but he didn't live in San Germán.
Where did he live?
He held significant civic status in the neighboring town of Coamo.
Another Portuguese elite operating in a completely different jurisdiction.
Yes. This document is a historical goldmine because it acts as a blacklight on their hidden network. First, it physically proves the intricate, blended nature of these Portuguese-Spanish alliances. You have the Matos family, based in San Germán, deeply and legally intertwined with other Portuguese-rooted families in Coamo.
It proves the network was expanding.
It proves they were not just a local anomaly, they were acting as a unified regional economic bloc crossing municipal lines.
And consider the scale implied by the payment method. If you are legally pledging upcoming cacao harvests to settle major debts, you are not talking about a few trees in your backyard.
No, you need volume for that.
Right. You are operating on a massive commercial agricultural scale. This document proves they controlled an agricultural empire capable of producing massive surplus.
And that leads to the brilliance of the legal loophole Diego used. The document shows how legal proceedings inadvertently immortalize family secrets. Diego was in a bind. He absolutely did not want to expose his family's vast independent wealth to the royal auditor.
Of course not. That would invite a tax raid.
Right. He just wanted to clear the debt so the auditor would pack up and leave. But to do that legally, he had to register the fact that his family controlled major cacao harvests, and he had to legally link himself to another powerful Portuguese figure, Antunes, over in Coamo.
He essentially used the complexity of his blended family to disperse the liability. By paying the debt for Antunes, he looks like a dutiful son. But technically, he obscures the true source of the Matos family's independent wealth.
A masterful deflection.
He satisfied the immediate demand of the auditor while keeping the actual ledger of the rescate completely hidden. He had to crack the door open just a tiny bit to hand the money through, and in doing so, he accidentally let future historians peek inside the house.
The Spanish bureaucracy was so rigid, so obsessed with recording every single transaction, that it effectively recorded its own subversion. The military auditor painstakingly wrote down the details of the cacao, the size of the debt, and the familial link between San Germán and Coamo.
And hundreds of years later, historians can look at that single sheet of parchment in the AGPR and realize the Matos network was moving massive amounts of cacao across jurisdictions.
Exactly. Which, if we tie it back to the beginning of our deep dive, means they were highly unlikely to be waiting years for a Spanish galleon to come pick up that cacao.
Oh, not a chance. They were almost certainly moving those massive cacao harvests out through the Rescate, trading them directly to the Dutch for more iron, more wine, and more power.
The 1652 document captures the family in motion. It captures them actively managing their vast, shadowy empire through the very rigid legal mechanisms their ancestor, Juan, had mastered. It is absolute proof of concept.
It really is a breathtaking testament to the sheer scale of what Juan Rodríguez de Olivencia started. I mean, let's just synthesize the legacy of this family and this town. We started with a Castilian lawyer who showed up in a forgotten, pirate-infested town in the 1500s. And look at what he and his descendants built.
They built a self-sustaining ecosystem. They created a localized architecture of wealth, legal protection, and underground trade that successfully dominated southwestern Puerto Rico for generations.
They outlasted the royal governors. They outsmarted the military auditors. They navigated the constant threat of pirate attacks. And they seemingly shielded themselves from the terrifying gaze of the Spanish Inquisition through strategic marriage and absolute secrecy.
And they achieved all of that by realizing a fundamental truth about their reality.
Which was?
True power in a neglected frontier society doesn't come from blindly following the law. It comes from writing the law, interpreting the law, and ultimately owning the people who enforce the law.
In the brutal reality of the early Caribbean frontier, the clever smuggler really was the one writing the local laws. It's a Machiavellian masterpiece of survival.
It forces us to completely reevaluate the history of the region. We can no longer look at it just as a story of a mighty European empire projecting power outward.
No, it's way more complicated.
We have to view it as a story of highly adaptable, incredibly intelligent local networks who figured out how to use the empire's own bureaucratic weight and blind spots against it.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. We've spent this entire deep dive looking at how the Matos family broke the rules, how they smuggled, how they subverted the Spanish crown, and how they lied to military auditors. And by the strict letter of the law, they were criminals. They were committing massive tax fraud and high treason.
By the letter of the law in Seville, their actions were unequivocally illegal.
But I want you to mull this over. When a government, like the Spanish crown in the 16th century, completely neglects its remote citizens, when it refuses to send supply ships, when it leaves them to starve, when it abandons them to be attacked by corsairs and outlaws their only means of acquiring food and tools.
It forces a choice.
Exactly. At what point does smuggling stop being a crime and start becoming an act of legitimate civic survival?
That is the essential, lingering question of the colonial frontier.
Does the law exist to serve the people, to ensure their physical survival and prosperity? Or do the people exist merely to serve a distant law, a rigid blueprint written by kings who have never even seen the ocean they claim to rule?
If the law mandates your starvation, breaking the law becomes a moral imperative. The Matos family didn't just smuggle to get rich. They smuggled to exist.
Think about that the next time you encounter a rule or a system that seems to make absolutely no sense on the ground. Sometimes the original architects get it wrong. And sometimes the only way to keep the building from collapsing on top of you is to completely ignore the blueprint. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows of the Spanish Empire. It's been an absolute pleasure unpacking this incredible history with you. Until next time, keep questioning the blueprint.